welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, I'm very happy to be joined by my guest who has been heralded as a singer of immense power and fervor, and one of the most powerful voices of our time, a creator, curator, performer at the intersection of many histories, cultures, and aesthetics. He is engaged in work that blends opera, art song, contemporary classical music, spirituals, gospels, and songs of protest as a means to tell a deeply personal story of perseverance that connects to all of humanity. Please welcome Davóne Tines. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on. And I really want to do that. I don't know if you follow basketball back in the day. I really want to have that Chicago Bulls sort of intro, and I give the longer intros with the music and everything behind me. So before I get too deep into the conversation about your work and things that are coming up, I want to let's start off with something that either you'll find this is easy or you'll find terrifying. Share your story. Tell us your story. Some of that. At what point did you want to pursue the classical arts and some of your background? I'm seeing Juilliard. I'm seeing Harvard. So let's get into it. Let's dive right in.
How much time you got?
The floor is yours.
Got 35 years? No. So yeah, my story in a nutshell, a very large nutshell perhaps, is that I grew up in rural Northern Virginia. I lived primarily with my grandparents. My grandfather was in the military for 30 years and retired a chief warrant officer from the Pentagon. And my grandmother was an educator, mainly in special education. And when they decided to retire, they wanted to go home to where their families were planted, which is about an hour and a half southwest of DC in horse country. And that was a very complicated context to grow up in because, generations, 3 or 4 or 5 generations back from my grandparents were enslaved on that land. And I grew up maybe 20 miles down the road from where parts of my family were sharecroppers and parts of my family were on various plantations. And those places are now large Virginia farms. I mean, in Virginia, we call them farms, but they're really like large ranch estates. So it's interesting driving around, the remnants of these places as you're on the school bus and you're going to school with people who may tangentially be connected to all of that context. But I think it led to, a quickening of my awareness of kind of a double reality or behind the veil or a double consciousness. And it led to a life of trying to reconcile the life I had with my family and my church family, the Black Baptist Church, Providence Baptist Church being basically the community center that I knew, religious, yes, but also just a place of gathering and a place of growth and learning from extended family. Reckoning that with my school experience, which was predominantly white. I was one of very, very few Black students in school. I was one of only 2 people of color in the gifted and talented program from middle school on through high school. But I found that I had a strong aptitude for a lot of different things. I excelled in my academics, and I really wanted to go to school to do everything but school. I went to do extracurriculars. I started playing violin when I was in elementary school and ended up playing that for 14, 15 years overall. Played in the chamber orchestra, was a concert master of that, went on to play it in college. But then I also got into singing. When I was little, everybody in my family, my church family, sang. No matter what you wanted to do, you were in the choir. And I just remember hours and hours long of choir rehearsals. And it's interesting that experience is very foundational. It finds its way into my musical practice right now in all kinds of realms, and classical and beyond. But I didn't really realize I had a real talent for singing until I was in high school. My grandfather actually realized that I had a unique voice. In his retirement, he directed some church choirs, and he's a very charismatic man who would come home and say, "How are you?" And one day I said that I am fine. And he said, wow, I think you've got a I think you've got a unique voice and you should try to do something with it. So he encouraged me to join my high school choir. And then I started doing musicals for fun. I kept getting the lead in the musicals, even though I wasn't really gunning for that. And it just kind of seemed like a path of least resistance and kind of a surprise. It wasn't exactly a focus or, I'm going to be a singer, but it was a lot of fun and I kept getting asked to do it. So I did it. And then I wanted to go to conservatory for undergrad, and I thought I would go to Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore, but my family said that's not really a job. So maybe you should cast your net a little broader and look at something in the liberal arts. And so I ended up going to Harvard University. I ended up studying sociology and music, kind of a dual degree. And I realized that I thought I wanted to be close to the performing arts, as a career and older in life. And studying sociology was kind of my best route there. I thought that if I could understand broadly why culture creates and propagates arts, then I could understand how to administrate them at the institutional level. And so that led to a lot of solid experiences in undergrad. I was in the Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra playing violin. I was the first general manager of that orchestra and then the president. And that's a 200-year-old organization that's separate from the school. So,
Right.
As the student president, you answer to a board, you work a budget, you oversee, a whole staff of colleagues and friends trying to make this thing tick. And I also did similar work with the choir, sang in the Renaissance Polyphony Choir. But yeah, a lot of kind of real first experiences in college that would kind of be a foundation of the work that I'm up to now. And then graduating, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I thought I'd just step out and try something. So
Right.
I got an internship with the American Repertory Theater, and I ended up basically working as a lowly associate producer. They were paying me $4.38. Kidding, a little bit, but I learned a lot on the ground. I learned a lot on the ground, figuring out, how does a theater run? How does it get programmed? How do you the part of the theater that I worked with brought in a lot of, traveling acts. So you learn how do different people do all kinds of different kinds of performing. And that was really, really foundational experience. And then I ended up moving back to Virginia and working for a symphony, actually, that I had played for when I was younger, a regional symphony. I wrote their grants, and instead of paying me, they asked me to be a board member, which was a very interesting thing, as a young Black person just out of college being on a symphony board, which is a predominantly white and older, wealthy space. But I was really excited to just figure it out. I had a lot of energy from my just having gotten a sociology degree and trying to say, okay, well, if we're going to get grants, we need to understand demographics and the context of this organization and what you're trying to do. And I think it was a really great journey for me and that group of people to think, okay, what is the larger mission of this place aside from, just upholding some sort of canon or status quo. And I worked for an educational nonprofit that connected low-income, high-potential high schoolers to academic celebrities, and met a lot of different artists through that, including the author Amy Tan, who was very inspirational. And I worked for George Mason University. I was a stage manager, and then I ended up being a production manager. I did a crazy thing where I actually ended up production managing an opera that I was also the lead in. That was kind of crazy and something I think I could only do when I was, 22. Singing a role and then sitting in a 3-hour production meeting afterward, and then getting, to do it all again the next day. But after doing all these different, jobs and different angles of arts administration, I started to think, okay, what does grad school look like? What am I going to do next? What's the next step? I'd been working in the world for a little over 2 years, and I wanted to figure out, how do I look for a path forward? And I thought maybe I'll go to business school and become an administrator, forthright, And looking at those applications, I realized this isn't me.
No,
I don't
not at all.
think that this is the path that I want to walk down. I didn't want to take the GRE. I didn't want to take accounting classes. I wish I had, though. No, that would have helped a little bit. But I kind of challenged myself in saying, you know what, I actually do want to try to sing. And if I get into a school, I'll do that. And if I don't, I will look a little more closely at these business school applications. But I applied to Juilliard and a bunch of other schools, but got in at Juilliard and for the grad program and took that as a sign that I should pursue it. And
Yeah.
From there, it was a really interesting experience. I'd come from a broad liberal arts background in a place where interrogation of your academic experience was very encouraged. And there was a very clear due process for how you can ask questions about anything. And you can try to chart your own path based on your interests, your passions. And in a conservatory setting, you are told what your passions and your path are. You're prescribed a role, or they're very much forthright about there are boxes and we will find which one you fit into and give you the skills to execute that box to the best of your ability. And that was an interesting and kind of hard transition.
Yeah.
I went back to school to hopefully attain skills to figure out what I wanted to say as a person or an artist. And so the idea that, those ideas would be preconceived for me was a difficult pill to swallow. And so in graduating from Juilliard, I had a unique voice. I'm a bass baritone, but not your typical bass baritone. I have a very high extension and a very low range as well. And it didn't seem like the boxes that they had, were anywhere that I could fit. And I felt pretty discouraged. I didn't think I'd have a career in singing when I left. And actually through encouragement from the maestro Lauren Mizell, who used to be the head of the New York Philharmonic and a lot of other symphonies, an older man who was just very venerated in the operatic field. He had a summer music program that I went to, and he was very, very encouraging, which really surprised me because I hadn't received that encouragement in, the other contexts I'd been in. And It kind of started to grow in my own confidence in saying, okay, how can I figure out how to do this? And my way back into it was singing with a really good friend named Nat O'Coin, who now is a MacArthur genius. And he was writing his first opera. And I ended up being a lead in that opera, just in the workshops, just as they were trying to figure out what is this piece. And it ended up being taken on by the American Repertory Theater, the place where I used to be an intern. Now I was a lead singer in their new production, which was quite an interesting, spiral of events. And that led to further exposure. And I met, people like John Adams, who's an amazing, opera composer of our time, and Peter Sellers, similarly opera director of our time, and doing a lot of new works. And I kind of entered, the opera field from left field. From doing contemporary work and premiering a lot of work. I mean, my violin chops and piano chops served me well as a musician because, singing contemporary music requires a different foundation of musicianship that I was able to apply. And just similar to that way, I really loved doing contemporary work. I really loved doing contemporary work because the reason for doing it was always clear. Back in Juilliard, I would get confused when they say you have to learn all these German songs. And it's like, why? And they said this is the core repertoire. These are the building blocks. They said, okay, but what about things that I connect to more closely? Like I will do this and learn this, but what about a song literature that is a little more close to my lineage or my heritage? And doing new work, it seemed like I was invited to be a part of the conversation of why, which kind of led me to do what I think was my strongest work, because there was a raison d'etre. And then having had a broad arts administration experience, it led me to even be more curious and say, well, can I have a hand in making things myself or making things with friends and colleagues that I met along the way, which led to all kinds of stuff that I'm, now in the midst of and in love with, making projects that actually articulate things that I think are deeply important and deeply personal, but hopefully can be of service to the people that engage it.
Wow. And it's like, fine. And one, thank you. Thank you for walking us through that and condensing it. Because I'm thinking, like, as you're describing that's like, how, in what time frame, how old are you again? And that's what I'm kind of going through. And I think, being able to, one of the key things that stuck out to me was, being able to connect with something that relates to who you are as an individual. Like, in this sort of space. And I hear it from artists all the time, especially artists that look like you and I. They're like, yeah, this is kind of the zone we're in. And I'm kind of making this stuff. And I don't know if they're going to get it. I don't know if I'm going to be accepted and so on. And I want to do stuff that actually, this is going to be a pun because I'm an old man. I want to do stuff that sings to me, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not often afforded. But when you're able to do it and kind of seeing, one of the things I looked at older interviews, one of the things that I think you touched on earlier, kind of being that gifted student that's in this class that's full of like people who may not look like you. And it's kind of like doing that now in that sort of industry and being within classical music and doing like work that is related to who you are as a person and who your identities and the different tribes, if you will, that you're in, but doing it for an audience that may not look like you. It's almost like cycling back and going back to what you've experienced maybe in the past.
Definitely. And I think that way of working, which I share with a lot of close friends and colleagues, is more about honoring people for the fullness of their identity. Yeah. In a classical music setting, there's this idea that our art is about communicating something, connecting to the human experience. But what does it mean for the people that are, quote unquote, executing that art to be treated as functionaries, And then it's like, okay, what are they functionaries of? And you think about writers or composers. So composers are writing things that articulate, their passions, their wants, their stories. But it's this question of why is, the incarnation of someone's existence only happening from one angle?
Right.
And then what does it also mean for an institution to bring that work to life? They enlist people, but it can happen in a way and seems to have happened in a way for generations that the people enlisted to bring works to life are not actually honored as full human beings. It seems that there is a detriment of institutions not treating the artists and people in general, staff administrators even, as full humans that are engaging in this practice. And I think that is something that, yes, exists within the arts to think about and work on, but I think it's transferable to the rest of the world. I think anybody that's in a working context or in community with other people should be considered people. And, part of how that shows up in my work with the projects that I work on, the most important question is the most important question is, how are you?
Yeah.
How are you doing? What do you need? Before starting any day, checking in with each and every person, whether that's a castmate, an administrator, a musician, a conductor, just to have that connectivity and say, before we're doing this work, we are people foremost. And I think if there is that foundation, the work that comes out of that is going to be that much richer and that much more connected.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. I look back when I go over biographies and any of the notes that people send over, I always find it very interesting of like how weighty it is, how long it is, and how someone describes themselves. And I've had a few that are people that are kind of outside of the arts realm, but they really focus on the sort of cultural specter. And they start off with, I'm a human first, and really kind of checking in and being tapped in. And part of it is like being likable, I suppose. And part of it is being able to relate and be charismatic. There's maybe some politics in it. But I think, looking at it, if we're able to really go back into the personal component, because I look at this, when I'm doing this podcast, and I think I talked about it a little bit before we got started, I don't want people to come off as this is a transaction. You give me what I need and we're going to go from here. And it's a certain degree of, it's a contrivance here. It's, you know, you have the questions beforehand. We know that we're going to meet at this time and all of that, but being able to connect on a person to person sort of connection, that's where the important stuff comes in. Hey, how are you? What are you into? What are you thinking of? And, you know, I joke with people sometimes. It was like, so how long do I have? I was like, what can I talk about? I was like, look, if you want to talk about comics for like 30 minutes, we can talk about that. We could talk about Tom and Jerry if you want. And I don't want to make it feel like the guest is, it's only about their work. It's only about, why do people know who you are? It's about who the person is, in my opinion.
Beautiful.
What does it mean for you? Like from you, what does it mean to like be a classical singer? Like how do you define it? What do you put around it? When people come to me and they're like, so you're a podcaster. I was like, no, I'm facilitating people telling their story. They're telling their story. I'm just providing a framework. That's how I define it, or have you, from what I do. So from what you do, how do you define what you do?
Definitely. Yes, I'm a classical singer, but also more so, I consider myself a singer and a creator. And it just so happens that the technique upon which my singing is built is derived from a Western European tradition. But by the very nature of, you know, the broadness of my identity, there's a lot of other cultural lineages and techniques at play. But also my voice lends itself to a certain repertoire or a certain sort of sound that is connected to a certain genre. But in terms of what does it mean to functionally be a classical singer, I think I've already been getting at it. I really took this idea of art as a means of personal expression really to heart. And it's made me have that lens in interrogating everything that I interact with and everything that I do. You know, if it's not directly in service of honoring the humans involved, it's not necessarily something I want to be connected to. And so this notion of maybe changing what it might be to be a classical singer, I think is just a byproduct of trying to walk down what is an incarnation of being a singer in the classical realm that feels like it is true to the integrity of that idea, you know, full expression as an individual, which has led me to make things. I do think something that is unique about what I'm up to is that I do make things, you know. A personal accomplishment that happened this year was I was commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic to create a piece for them and the Hollywood Bowl. And I made a piece called Concerto Number 2, Anthem. And it was the second concerto I made. I've started this concerto series because I used to play violin, and I realized I was never going to play a concerto on violin with an orchestra, but I thought maybe I could sing one. And so this second concerto called Anthem is a piece that you know, met this fun opportunity to do the All Americana concert at the Bowl. And it made me think, okay, it's got to be something that utilizes that scale and utilizes that context. And I want to do a magic trick. And in this magic trick, I want to try to turn the Star Spangled Banner into the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, over the course of 3 concerto movements as a means of saying, you know, here's the Star Spangled Banner, and it represents a lot in this country that perhaps is a faulty foundation and maybe has not upheld something that we're all happy with right now. I think you could ask a lot of people, and maybe they're not exactly happy with where things are in this country. And I think we can look to our larger symbols like an anthem and the Star Spangled Banner being something that was born of war, born of colonialist ideals, born of things like calling people slaves. Or there's the argument about how they may be referring to indentured servants. But in any case, talking about the subjugation of another for the victory of a different group, you know, I don't think these are great morals to be standing on. And it maybe hasn't led us to the greatest place. But I love the Black National Anthem. You know, James Weldon Johnson and his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson, made a beautiful thing that is about honoring the individual within the collective to honor the past so that we can stand united in our present and look towards, you know, some sort of brighter future. facing the rising sun of our new day begun. So I wanted to say, okay, here's the Star Spangled Banner. Let me sing to you the other verses that might be a little more problematic and kind of show music that underlines that. You know, it gets a little scary, it gets a little warlike. And then in the second movement, we walk through some parts of Americana, but trying to reframe them in a way. One example is the song God Bless America, which was sung by a woman named Kate Smith, who championed that song, premiered it for Irving Berlin and sang it quite a lot. But complexly, Kate Smith also sang the song Pickaninny Heaven, which, you know, is based on a pejorative for those that don't know. And it's a pejorative about, you know, children of color. And it's not about, you know, condemning this person, but it's about acknowledging that people can have, you know, complicated relationships to race and what it means to make art about that and what it means to be a person that, you know, may not overtly understand that what they're doing can be harmful to other groups of people, but that people hold multiple truths, and facing that is critical. But I had some fun in trying to reveal this uncomfortable dichotomy to the audience in mixing up the words of God Bless America and Pickaninny Heaven. The words, the kind of conglomeration of words goes something like, God bless America, land that I haven't you been told of the place where the good little pickaninnies go, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with great big watermelons rolling around and getting in your way. In Pickaninny Heaven, my home sweet home.
Wow, that is gold. And I like kind of being able to take these things and turn them on their heads. And I think it's important to in delving towards the truth and in delving and doing storytelling, because I see that as another component of your background. It's funny. Like I look back at, you know, I was in the South on Juneteenth, right? And I was watching the coverage and I was like, did they just rebrand Juneteenth? Because I was like, the colors are not the same, you know, as there's a Juneteenth flag, which ironically have the same colors as the American flag. Because like, so which one is it, guys? And I see a lot of the Pan-African colors, almost like this was a rebrand. And I'm like, whose choice is this? So it's like, are you separating us from this? I was like, it's not that long ago. We could see this sort of history like right here, and just some of the stuff that came with it. But I think in taking like, hey, this happened, and I'm combining with this as far as Pickaninny Heaven, and just taking that approach. It's like, you know, these things happen, right? You know, it's like reminding people, because our memories are really short sometimes. And I think being able to look back at it and tell some of the stories and say, this is my perspective, and being a person of color, being a person that is a male, being a person that has this sort of background or what have you, I think that is important. I think that, you know, having those perspectives, often they're overshadowed, they're kind of swept to the side, but being able to use your background, your acumen, and the opportunities that you have to really show that, as applauding that.
Thank you. Yeah, and further to this idea of hopefully shifting what it means to be a classical singer, you know, making something like that, or making, you know, other pieces. I wrote a musical that hopefully will end up on Broadway in not too long. But I'm just hoping to offer the opportunity for singers and performing artists to have more agency with what they're doing, and have a bigger voice within institutions to say, this is who I am and this is what I want to use, you know, my gifts or talents to do. And furthermore, for institutions to start actually asking the question, who are you? What do you want to do? And how can we offer our massed resources in order to support that? You know, the onus shouldn't come completely from the people that are perhaps at a disadvantage in terms of power. So in changing, I'm just hoping to model this opportunity for people to be more broadly supported for their multifaceted existence.
Thank you. Thank you for that work. So I got two more real questions, and then I want to hit you with those rapid fire questions. So in peeling back the onion a bit, what would you say, like, creatives? Because, like, you know, I imagine you know several creators, you've collaborated and all of this great stuff as well. What would you say, like, there's a secret or a trait that most creatives have. I remember reading or listening to a clip of Jay-Z saying that all creatives are just really like terrified, that they're just scared or what have you. And it's a thing. And some people say, oh, well, they're all like, they never think that they're good enough, but really they rise to the challenge, or most of them are procrastinators. From your vantage point, what is a trait that you think, most creatives share?
I'm going to talk and maybe it'll come out.
Okay. I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
Being a creator is a very interesting, role or task to take on, or something to embody, because by the very definition, you are making something that otherwise hadn't existed. You are trying to pull together things that perhaps other people haven't seen and perhaps considered disparate, or you're trying to pull something out of the ether or the universe that and make it incarnate. And that's a very radical act, and it takes uncommon ways of reaching that, and it takes people that are willing to play within the margins and the borders of what there is in order to imagine a new or a different way. You can't create a new thing without kind of shifting or even breaking things that already are existing. So that takes a lot of courage. Yeah. And it can be hard to, or I guess a better way of putting it is that involves a certain level of vulnerability. If you are to make something, you don't know how that's going to fare in the world. You hope that, or I hope that, things that I make are in service of a broader context, or you hope that people will appreciate or understand or connect to. And that could lend itself to all kinds of behaviors, whether that's fear from vulnerability, whether that's insecurity, whether that is seemingly procrastination. I mean, I've just commonly taken to the idea now that when I'm presented with an opportunity to make something, a lot of times it's just got to go in the back corner, or it's got to go in the back kitchen in my mind and just marinate. I've grown to a place of just trusting that there is work happening, even if you're not completely obsessed or focused on it in the front of your mind. Some things just need time to settle. And it's kind of also honoring, a deeper consciousness that hopefully is attuned to this possibility of making something out of what was not there. Yeah. So yeah, being a creator is a unique a unique way to be in the world.
Yeah. I agree. And it is this thing where we, as creators, we need time just to kind of do nothing. That marination that you described, that is a thing. Like, I try to it's like, hey, create, do it, make it happen. I was like, I got nothing for you, but it hits me when I'm not expecting it. And it's like, all right, let me come up with some questions. Oh, this would be a good idea. Or, like I said, I'm an old man. I'm 37. I'm an old man. So everything is a pun. Everything is a dad joke. And I'm like, all right, how can I turn this goofy pun into maybe programming? And what does that look like, and really building off of it? But I can't just say, let me turn the key and something good is going to come out. It's like, let me write this down. And then to your point, leave that in the kitchen and come back to it.
Yes. And that just made me think, so now I co-teach a course at Harvard in interdisciplinary storytelling with one of my best friends and collaborators. It's called How to Be a Tool. Storytelling across disciplines. We just wanted to say how did we teach how to be a tool at Harvard.
That's amazing.
But no, it also has a bit of truth in that it's how to be a tool for storytelling, how to be a tool for change in society. And something that we are always working through with our students is the idea that it's okay to not know everything. Yeah. It's okay to, people say it's okay to fail. And I think saying it that way is really scary to people, because you don't want to think, oh my God, I'm going to impendingly fail. But I think another way to frame it is it's okay to try again. It's okay to make something, look at it, conceive of, how did this do? How did this live up to my purpose and my values? And then go and reassess. You're allowed to go back to the drawing board and visit over and over and over again. That's the joy of making something, is it's part of a practice.
Yeah.
You know, you really can continue to shape and mold until something gets there. No one gets everything right on the first try. And in fact, you probably don't want the first try of a lot of people's things, whether that's a vehicle or a musical.
Yeah.
You know, you want people to spend some time tinkering and honing that thing.
Yeah. I mean, I look at comedians, you know, it's a large swath of people that I interview on here, talk to comedians, and it's like, all right, when you first were like working through that new material, how did that go? You know, I don't want to see you on that first night. I want to see you like midway through, like, all right, it's polished, it's refined. You took out that weird joke at the beginning, and now it's something that's actually good.
Completely.
So this is the last real question I got, and it's more of self-serving, it's more shameless pluggy, but I want to see what's next. I read that, you know, might be a Baltimore debut coming up, some big things happening 22-23 season. So let's tell me about what's coming up, what's on the radar.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff coming up. Most closely, I'm going to make my New York Philharmonic debut singing Beethoven 9. I'm about to make my Carnegie Hall recital debut with a piece I made called Recital Number 1, Mass, which blends a lot of different music from you know, my earlier experiences to try to tell a story about how people can deal with problems. What am I doing? I'm going to the Cleveland Orchestra, and I'm singing in the beautiful, beautiful Severance Hall, one of my favorite pieces called El Nino by John Adams. And it's kind of a modern retelling of the Messiah story, but from a predominantly female and Latinx perspective. Nice. And it's just some of the most gorgeous music ever. What else? Yes, Baltimore, coming to Baltimore on November 6th and singing this recital program. And I'm so excited to share that with the place that I now call home. And yeah, then hopefully I'll go eat so much turkey and oyster stew, my favorite Thanksgiving food that my grandmother makes.
That's great. That's great. It's great to hear. And it's great to hear that it's more like folks in the classical arts that are kind of changing like how it's being viewed and bringing that to Baltimore. It's like we're classing up the place. I love it. I love to hear it. Not to say we're not classy, by the way. You know, I'm a Baltimorean, so I can't knock it. So real quick, I want to hit you with some rapid fire questions. And since you talked about food, is great because I have a food related question in here to start off. Let's not overthink it. Here we go. Breakfast food or dinner food? Which one are you going with? What is your like favorite between the two? Are you a breakfast food or a dinner food sort of guy?
Definitely dinner food. Breakfast is functional. Dinner is joy.
I love it. It's like I'll take that oatmeal dinner. Yeah. So that turkey sandwich, right? Can we get all the trimmings?
Definitely.
This is ridiculous. What was the last word that you looked up to see what it meant? Like you're very verbose. You have some terms. I've heard some things come out. I'm looking them up now.
Wait, there were two. Yeah, my best friend used two words that I looked up. I kind of knew what they meant, but I never heard them used that way. He used the words agita and imbroglio. You know, Italian terms, it might be in opera, but agita meaning like a lot of nervous energy around something, and imbroglio meaning it's kind of like a big, dense mess.
So you're just describing me as a podcaster in both words. Thanks. I appreciate Davóne. I appreciate that. I threw out every now and again, I throw out these marketing phrases when I talk to people. I was like, oh, yeah, you're a cultural impresario. The guy told it, he looked at me, he was like, yeah, I'm stealing that. He's like, I'm using that.
Beautiful.
When are you most productive? It could be, you know, time of the day, time of the year, like, you know, in terms of like planning now, like looking at things like on a Monday, I'm at my most productive in terms of prepping. But during the course of the week, it's like you get me on a Friday, I got no questions for you. It's got to be just the work. None of the practice, just the work.
Completely. I don't know. I mean, I guess sometimes I have that, you know, 11 o'clock at night burst of some sort of inspiration. But I think in terms of like doing hard focus work, late morning is good. And then once I get past a certain hour in the day, say 6 or 7, the brain shuts off or can only do, you know, a certain style of work.
Yeah, it's like early morning. It's like, here's some algebra. I can work on that. Afternoon, it's like, look, what is this? What are we doing again? This is the last one I got for you. And this is, I've said it before multiple times during this podcast, that I'm an old man and I like puns. So I hope you get a sense of what I'm looking for with this next answer. What would the name of your autobiography be?
Let's see. Do we want the G-rated or the
You can have more than one. It's like, oh, this is my memoir. This is the one leading up to the real one.
I don't know. I think it could be something like, how can you do better?
Okay.
Or try harder, or something that's kind of a provocation that, I've had to have for myself, but hopefully invite other people to hold as well. Something that deals with a continual process of reflection and self change and refinement, just as any creative process is iterative.
See, here's the thing, Davon. You didn't do the thing. I was hoping for best of times, but you didn't go for it. You didn't take the bait.
All right. Let me think.
I mean, but I think but yours absolutely works. Me, I'm just lowbrow and everything is a bit to me, but what you described works.
I think I might just name it Imbroglio.
See, you know what? That actually works. That works really well. So shout out to you, and thank you for that, and thank you for indulging the rapid fire questions. So
of course,
with that, I want to again thank you for coming on to this podcast, and I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check you out, where to follow you, social media, website. The floor is yours.
Definitely. You can follow me on Instagram, also an opera singer. I try to share more about, what I'm up to and just what process is like. Feel free to message me. I always try to respond to people.
Well, there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Davóne Tines for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that they're voices, big voices, verbose voices, charismatic voices in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for them.